Easter is God's answer to the most difficult things in our lives. Not the things that are irritating or frustrating or get us down, but for the really big stuff. Easter is not God's answer to, oh, this kitchen renovation is so stressful. It's not the answer to that. It's not the answer to the difficulty of final exam week or the rage attack you might have in traffic. Easter doesn't really have anything to say about those things. Easter is God's response to the big stuff, to the stuff that it feels like has the power to finish us off. That's what Easter is for. There is a family in our community that is on the top of the minds of many of us today. The Messick family. They live in Coxsackie, and their daughter, Emma, is one of the best and brightest in the youth group at St. Mary's. She's just outstanding. And 10 days ago, at her dorm at SUNY Oneonta, she had a stroke, which rendered her speechless and paralyzed on one side. And this morning, her parents are keeping vigil by her bedside, as they have been for 10 days, at the ICU at Albany Med. Easter is for that. Easter is for the things that are overwhelming to us. Easter is God's answer to hopelessness. There are so many examples of how the resurrection has been at work in the world in our own day. One of my favorites, one that you hear about, but when you really start to look at is overwhelming, is the story of Nelson Mandela. He was a black man in a racist country who was imprisoned for fighting for justice. For 30 years he was imprisoned by a racist government. So what could the hope be? He's never going to get out. A black man jailed by a racist government, there's no hope. Except that amazingly, the government released him without any struggle at all. There were a lot of reasons for that. There was some international pressure from other countries. There was the worry that there might be a civil war in South Africa. But whatever it was, they decided on their own, without any pressure, to release Nelson Mandela. And if you were not alive in the early 90s when this happened and don't know the full story, listen to this. The black man who was jailed by a racist government in South Africa, once he got out of jail, he ran for president, and he won. He became the president of the racist government in his country. And he is known as the greatest president they ever had. He's been called the soul of his people. When he ran for president, the incumbent he defeated was the very one who had the power to jail him and the one who released him. The Pontius Pilate, if you will. Nelson Mandela, against impossible odds, won in the end. How? Jesus came to earth as God, as a human, and he was unbelievably convicted of the crime of blasphemy. The Son of God, blasphemy. And he was tortured and given the death penalty. And he was humiliated in front of everyone. They did it naked and next to really dark criminals. But he won in the end. How? It reveals to us an important spiritual principle that we need to know, which is that the greater the pain someone is in, the more hopeless the situation seems to be, the greater the miracle will be that undoes that. The more overwhelming your situation, the more hopeless you feel, the greater the miracle will be that allows you to win in the end. What Jesus came to reveal to us and what Nelson Mandela showed us is a very important law we must follow. When things are really bad, we need to not focus on the problem. we need to focus on the power of God, even when we pray. Let me explain what I mean by that. A lot of times, when we are praying in the middle of hopelessness, what we do with our prayer is tell God about how awful it is. God, please, my marriage is finally done. I don't know how I'm going to do this. How am I going to raise these kids alone? God, please, don't let me lose the house. God, please, not my mother, not my father. Those test results can't be true. I can't bear to live without them. God, please preserve my job. Please. But when we pray like that, we're telling God about the problem, as if God is a buddy who's meant to say, yeah, that stinks. We're telling God about the problem. We're actually focusing on the problem when we do that. Our job when we face something hopeless is not to tell God how big the problem is. It's to tell the problem how big God is. It's to remember that God knows how to free enslaved people by walking them through a sea. God knows how to free a black man jailed by a racist government and make him the president. God knows how to raise dead people up. When we are facing a hopeless situation, we need to not tell God about the problem. We need to tell the problem about God. There was a study done on the effect of prayer on people's health. They went to a hospital and they did a pretty extensive study on how many people were believers and how many people weren't, and then they looked at their results to see if there was any correlation. Do those people who believe in God have better health or better results in their health care than those who don't? And there have been many studies of this sort, and they often show different results. This particular study said that it made no difference at all. If you prayed, if you believed, if you didn't, no difference. You were just as sick or just as healthy as you would have been any other way. So the reporter taking this study went to a faith leader and asked, so, what do you have to say about this? Looks like this belief stuff doesn't help you in the doctor's office at all. And the faith leader said, God's job is not to make sick people better. That's a doctor's job. God's job is to make sick people brave. That's what Easter is all about. Easter is the permission that we have for the rest of our lives to be brave when facing things that look like they're going to finish us off. Easter gives us not only permission to be brave, it's our job. We have to be brave. And the way we can do it is by focusing on how much greater God's power is than the power of our problems. There is nothing that God cannot overcome. And it is our job to remember that. It was the job of Nelson Mandela to remember that 30 years in prison before he ever knew he could be the president. It is the job of the Messick family to remember that today in the Albany Med ICU. Because Easter shows us that actually we're all going to win in the end. God has everything rigged in our favor. Everything is already rigged in our favor. So we actually can't lose. We have permission to be brave because no matter how bad it looks as we're going through it, in the end, we're going to win. Jesus did. Nelson Mandela did. And the Messick family will. And so will you. And so will I.